The silence of the trading floor shattered when the first alert siren blared, screens erupting in red flashes as financial figures collapsed before stunned eyes. Henry Caldwell said, "This cannot be real." His voice cracked under pressure, but the numbers kept falling like shards of glass from a broken tower. Panic swept across the boardroom as assistants rushed in with trembling hands, clutching reports that confirmed the nightmare. Claire Whitmore said, "The leak hit every channel at once, Henry. We are exposed." Journalists shouted outside the glass walls, cameras pressed like vultures against the panes. Henry Caldwell stood frozen, his breath shallow, his empire trembling beneath his feet. The once calm haven of polished marble and hushed voices was now chaos, drenched in alarms that wailed louder with each second. Jonathan Pierce said, "They already know everything, Henry, and we are bleeding." The betrayal was immediate and brutal, the company's walls of secrecy crushed in a moment. Henry Caldwell's chest tightened as a truth dawned on him. Someone close had set this fire, and the blaze would consume everything. The news channels erupted like wildfire, headlines screaming across every glowing screen in the city. Anchors spoke in rapid tones, their voices cracking under the urgency of collapse. Henry Caldwell stood in his high-rise office, glass walls framing a skyline now dimmed by heavy clouds. Claire Whitmore said, "The public thinks you orchestrated this, Henry, and they want blood." Outside, protesters gathered with signs, their chants echoing upward like a storm. Jonathan Pierce said, "We are not just losing money, we are losing trust, and that is fatal." The city that once celebrated Henry Caldwell as a titan now painted him as a villain, the empire he built crumbling in real time. His reflection in the glass window looked like a stranger, a man stripped of certainty. The chaos was no longer confined to his company. It had spilled into the streets, and every voice demanded his downfall. Inside the boardroom, the directors sat like predators circling a wounded beast. Their whispers were knives slicing through the thick silence. Claire Whitmore said, "They think you cannot recover, Henry." Jonathan Pierce tapped his pen against the table, each sound a drumbeat of condemnation. Henry Caldwell said, "This company is mine, and I will not surrender it." Yet his voice lacked the steel it once carried. The directors exchanged knowing glances, calculating futures without him. Betrayal was no longer a shadow. It lived in the room, breathing against his neck. Each passing second drained his control, and for the first time, Henry Caldwell felt small inside his own empire. Phone screens buzzed endlessly as investors demanded answers, their voices sharpened into accusations. Henry Caldwell's phone rang until he hurled it across the desk, the crash silencing the room for a beat. Claire Whitmore said, "Ignoring them will bury us faster." Jonathan Pierce said, "The investors smell blood. Henry, they will come for you first." Across the city, faceless voices demanded his resignation, stockholders plotting his removal like vultures circling a corpse. The noise of greed, betrayal, and fear merged into a deafening storm. Henry Caldwell pressed his palms against his temples, the weight of an empire collapsing against his skull. Alone at last, Henry Caldwell stood in the boardroom's darkened silence. The alarms were gone, yet their echoes haunted him, replaying in his skull like cruel laughter. His empire had been pierced, and every hand he trusted seemed ready to twist the knife deeper. Claire Whitmore's warnings, Jonathan Pierce's fury, the chaos outside, they swirled into a storm pressing against his chest. Henry Caldwell said, "This cannot be the end, not like this." But the city roared back with voices calling his downfall. In the glow of dying screens, he realized the battle had only begun, and it would demand more than he could ever give. The night settled heavy over the city as Henry Caldwell sat in the dimly lit office with Claire Whitmore at his side. Shadows stretched across the glass walls, but the silence between them felt sharper than any blade. Henry Caldwell said, "Every eye is on me, and I can feel them circling." Claire Whitmore leaned forward, her voice low and deliberate. You built an empire of glass, Henry, and now is cracking from every direction. He stared at his reflection in the window, a man hollowed out by suspicion. Jonathan Pierce entered with a scowl, his tone biting. The board is restless, Henry. They want answers you don't have. Henry Caldwell clenched his fists, anger pushing against despair. Claire Whitmore said, we must choose allies carefully, because enemies are already at the table. The air grew colder, the walls closer, and Henry Caldwell realized trust was the rarest currency left in his collapsing empire. In the hushed corridors of the headquarters, Matthew Kane lingered like a shadow, his words poisoned with charm. He smiled as he whispered to directors passing by, Henry Caldwell is faltering, and his empire needs new blood. His tones slid into their ears like smoke, curling doubts around their thoughts. A once loyal ally, Matthew Kane now planted seeds of betrayal, trading loyalty for ambition. Claire Whitmore caught sight of him, her jaw tightening as she said, his whispers will cost us everything. Jonathan Pierce muttered. He was waiting for this moment, Claire circling like a vulture. Matthew Kane's presence turned the hallway into a battlefield of loyalties, each whisper sharpening the knife aimed at Henry Caldwell's back. In a rival tower across the city, Victor Harlow poured whiskey into a crystal glass, the amber glow catching the smirk on his face. Victor Harlow said, the moment he stumbles, the market will crown me. His lavish office reeked of power, walls lined with leather-bound books and gleaming trophies. He leaned over a glowing screen, watching Henry Caldwell's empire burn in headlines. His assistant entered, her voice steady. The board members are wavering. Your timing is perfect. Victor Harlow raised his glass and whispered, let Henry Caldwell drown, and I will rise from the wreckage. The manipulation was not subtle. It was orchestration, conducted like a symphony of ruin. At the far end of the office, unnoticed, Olivia Reed sat quietly, her pen scratching across a small notebook. While chaos thundered above her, Olivia Reed listened, observed, and waited. She was underestimated, dismissed as background noise, but her eyes never missed a betrayal. Claire Whitmore walked past, barely glancing at her, unaware of the resolve simmering beneath the surface. Olivia Reed whispered to herself, they think I am nothing, but soon they will see. In that moment, a quiet shift began. Power no longer belonged only to the titans shouting in boardrooms, but also to the silent observer who learned their every weakness. Down in the employee lounge, discontent brewed like storm clouds. David Mercer slammed his fist on the vending machine, muttering, they climb towers of glass while we bleed on the floor. Around him, workers exchanged tired, bitter glances, their faith in Henry Caldwell gone. One employee whispered, he built his empire on our backs, and now it collapses on our heads. The disillusionment spread like wildfire, and their voices became a chorus of resentment. Henry Caldwell's name was no longer a symbol of triumph, but of exploitation. David Mercer leaned against the wall, eyes dark, his tone low. If this is the end, let it bury him too. The employees were no longer silent. They were ready to oppose the empire that consumed them. The television studio buzzed with frantic energy as anchors dissected every word Henry Caldwell uttered in his latest press briefing. His carefully chosen phrases were twisted into daggers, slicing his credibility apart on national screens. Henry Caldwell said, we remained stable despite these challenges. But the networks replayed it with mocking undertones. Claire Whitmore sat in the shadows of his office, her voice sharp. They will never let you breathe, Henry. They want spectacle. Outside the glass walls, the city pulsed with glowing billboards flashing his disgraced face. Jonathan Pierce slammed his fist on the desk, snarling, every channel has turned your name into a curse. The betrayal of the media felt like another weapon aimed at Henry Caldwell's chest. his empire drowning in relentless noise. In the dim finance department, stacks of documents spread across the desk as Jonathan Pierce shifted numbers with deliberate care. He scribbled adjustments, twisting financial reports into illusions of stability. Jonathan Pierce said, "They will never see the rot beneath if I guide their eyes elsewhere." Henry Caldwell entered with suspicion flickering in his gaze. He whispered, "What are you hiding from me, Jonathan?" Jonathan Pierce snapped the folder shut, smirking faintly. "Protecting you, Henry, from truths too sharp to expose." The papers hummed with lies, every number another step toward collapse. Claire Whitmore lingered at the doorway, her voice heavy. "Secrets will consume us all." Shadows of deceit grew across the room, each keystroke a reminder of betrayal tightening its noose. The shareholder meeting swelled with fury as voices rose against Henry Caldwell's name. Rows of wealthy investors shouted accusations, their anger echoing through the marble hall. One man shouted, "You've destroyed our trust, Henry, and we will not forgive it." Henry Caldwell stood at the podium, his voice strained but defiant. "I will not abandon this company." Yet their faces twisted with disdain, Pence scribbling notes of removal. Claire Whitmore whispered at his side, "They are not listening, Henry. They are preparing your fall." Jonathan Pierce muttered bitterly, "Their money has already chosen another." The atmosphere became electric, betrayal formalized through signatures and silence. In a quiet restaurant corner, Richard Stanton nursed a glass of brandy, his gaze steady on Henry Caldwell. Richard Stanton said, "Ambition burned me once, and it is burning you now." His words carried the weight of a man who once ruled the empire and lost it all. Henry Caldwell listened, shadows dancing across his weary face. Claire Whitmore shifted uneasily, her voice low, "You speak as if fate is already sealed." Richard Stanton chuckled bitterly. "It always is, Claire. Ambition devours its own." Henry Caldwell's silence betrayed his fear, his shoulders sagging, as though every word carved another piece of his resolve. The mentor's presence was not a comfort, but a ghostly reminder of the cost that loomed ahead. Late at night, whispers circled of a force unseen, a shadow investor whose influence reached deeper than any board vote. Claire Whitmore said, "There's someone behind all this, Henry, pulling strings in silence." Jonathan Pierce muttered, "If the rumors are true, we are pawns in their game." Henry Caldwell stood by the window, staring at the city, lights flickering like signals coded with secrets. His reflection looked fractured, the image of a man unraveling under invisible hands. Claire Whitmore pressed, "We must know their name before it's too late." The silence answered with dread, as though the city itself hid the truth, and Henry Caldwell understood. His empire was no longer his own. Henry Caldwell sat at his desk when the first report landed, its words dripping with betrayal. His company's secrets had been leaked to the press, and panic began to claw at him. Henry Caldwell whispered. It came from inside. Claire Whitmore slammed the folder down, her voice sharp. "We are bleeding from our own walls." Jonathan Pierce muttered, "The board will crucify you when they realize this." The betrayal was not distant. It was breathing in the same air, walking the same halls. Henry Caldwell felt his empire splinter, not from outside force, but from a dagger driven from within. The polished marble floors echoed with the weight of treachery. In the shadows of the server room, Samantha Lowe's hands typed furiously, her eyes flicking toward the door with each keystroke. She whispered to herself, "They will never know until it's too late." The glowing monitors cast eerie light across her tense face. Henry Caldwell's secrets flowed from the servers like blood escaping a wound. "Upstairs," Claire Whitmore warned. "There is someone feeding our enemies." Jonathan Pierce growled, "Find them before we are gutted." Yet Samantha Lowe smiled faintly in the dark, the corporate spy hidden in plain sight, dismantling an empire from its core. The boardroom erupted into chaos. voices colliding like thunder. One director shouted, "We cannot survive this storm with Henry Caldwell at the helm." Another barked, "The investors are demanding blood." Henry Caldwell slammed his fist on the polished table, his voice strained. "This empire is mine, and I will not let it fall." Claire Whitmore said, "Every word you speak digs the grave deeper." Jonathan Pierce snarled, "The walls are closing in faster than you realize." The clash echoed off marble and glass, a battle not fought with weapons, but with sharpened words and crushing intent. Later, in the quiet of the corridor, Claire Whitmore leaned against the wall, her voice weary. "How much longer can we fight this storm?" Jonathan Pierce stepped closer, his words bitter. "Loyalty is a luxury we cannot afford." Claire Whitmore turned, eyes filled with conflict. "Henry Caldwell is drowning, but leaving him means betrayal." Jonathan Pierce snapped, "Staying means ruin." The silence between them was heavier than their words, each torn between survival and allegiance. The exposé hit the airwaves with devastating precision. Screens in every home blazed with headlines. "Caldwell Empire built on lies." Reporters spoke with venom, their words devouring Henry Caldwell's reputation. In his office, Henry Caldwell whispered, "They have turned the world against me." Claire Whitmore watched the screen, her voice tight. "It is worse than we feared." Jonathan Pierce cursed under his breath, "This is execution, not journalism." The cameras captured every crack, every scar, every ounce of his downfall. For the first time, Henry Caldwell's empire was not just weakened, it was humiliated in front of the world. The walls of Henry Caldwell's office shook with his rage as he hurled a glass against the wall, shards scattering like broken promises. His voice thundered, "They will not tear this from me." Claire Whitmore stepped back, her tone trembling. "You are pushing everyone away, Henry." Jonathan Pierce muttered, "You are losing allies faster than you are losing stock value." Henry Caldwell gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white, his fury swallowing reason. Outside, the city pulsed with the chants of protesters, each voice striking him like a hammer. He was no longer commanding respect, he was demanding survival. And in his desperation, he was isolating himself even further. Matthew Kane struck at the perfect moment, his smile cruel as he whispered poison into the ears of board members. He said, "Henry Caldwell is finished, and I will restore what he destroyed." The directors listened, their faces carved in stone, their silence more damning than words. Claire Whitmore overheard fragments, her voice tight. "He is orchestrating your downfall with precision." Jonathan Pierce spat bitterly. Matthew Kane was waiting for this storm. The betrayal unfolded like theater. Matthew Kane's ambition laid bare, a dagger driven deeper into Henry Caldwell's already bleeding empire. Victor Harlow seized the stage with the confidence of a conqueror. Reporters swarmed as he declared, "Caldwell's empire has fallen, and the future belongs to us." The cameras captured every word, his smirk painting him as the victor before the battle had even ended. Claire Whitmore watched the broadcast, whispering, "He is feeding on your collapse, Henry." Jonathan Pierce growled, "He has turned the spotlight into a weapon." Henry Caldwell stared at the screen, his reflection faint in the glass, his empire slipping through his fingers, while his rival claimed the crown of public opinion. In a forgotten corner of the office, Olivia Reed found her moment. She stood in silence, watching the chaos unfold, and whispered, "They underestimate me, but now I rise." The noise of shouting executives passed her by as if she were invisible, but her hands tightened around the notebook filled with every observation, every betrayal recorded. Claire Whitmore walked past, not sparing her a glance. Jonathan Pierce muttered angrily nearby, blind to her presence. Olivia Reed's heart pounded with quiet determination. an underdog prepared to take her place in the shifting storm. Richard Stanton returned to Henry Caldwell with truth too heavy to ignore. Richard Stanton said, "I once believed ambition would save me, but it destroyed me instead." "You are walking the same road, Henry," Henry Caldwell whispered. "Then what choice do I have?" Richard Stanton leaned closer, his eyes sharp with regret. "You can fight, but you will pay in blood and soul," Claire Whitmore said. "He is telling you what we all fear, Henry. The cost of this battle may be greater than survival itself." The mentor's words cut deeper than betrayal, forcing Henry Caldwell to confront the ruin ambition had carved before him. The evidence surfaced like a dagger pulled from the dark reports scattered across Henry Caldwell's desk, each line proof of sabotage. Claire Whitmore whispered, "This was never incompetence. It was war." Jonathan Pierce growled, "Someone planted this to burn you alive, Henry." Henry Caldwell's hands trembled as he traced the forged signatures and manipulated data. His voice cracked. "They built the fire beneath me while I held the torch." The betrayal was no longer suspicion but fact. His empire dismantled with calculated precision. Silence pressed heavy, the weight of undeniable sabotage suffocating them all. The confrontation erupted in the dead of night, Henry Caldwell storming into Matthew Kane's penthouse with fury burning in his eyes. Henry Caldwell shouted, "You orchestrated this betrayal." Matthew Kane smirked, his voice calm. Matthew Kane smirked. "I only did what you never had the strength to." Claire Whitmore tried to restrain Henry Caldwell, her voice sharp. "This rage will ruin you." Jonathan Pierce growled. He was waiting for this moment. The room pulsed with tension. Two former allies, now enemies, their words as sharp as blades. Henry Caldwell realized the betrayal was not just survival. It was ambition sharpened into treason. The shareholder meeting reached its brutal climax, the vote for Henry Caldwell's fate scrawled onto papers and displayed in cold numbers. One director said, "Your time is over, Henry." Another sneered. Another sneered. "We demand new leadership." Henry Caldwell stood at the center of the storm, his voice breaking. "I built this empire." Claire Whitmore whispered, "They have already buried you." Jonathan Pierce muttered bitterly, "The execution is done." The vote sealed his fate. The empire ripped from his hands in the cold formality of signatures and silence. Victor Harlow stepped forward with a predator's grin, seizing the moment with merciless precision. Victor Harlow said, "The empire has chosen me now." The board applauded faintly, the sound hollow yet devastating. Henry Caldwell staggered back, his voice a whisper. "You planned this from the beginning." Claire Whitmore's eyes burned, her words low. "They traded kings for executioners." Jonathan Pierce spat. "He is not a savior. He is a vulture." Yet the room bowed to Victor Harlow, the rival who turned downfall into coronation. Henry Caldwell sat alone in the aftermath, the applause still echoing in his ears. Though the room was now empty, he whispered, "They stripped me bare before the world." Claire Whitmore approached slowly, her voice breaking. "You have lost everything." Jonathan Pierce muttered bitterly, "This humiliation will be your grave." The screens above, the screens above flickered with headlines of his downfall, every word another lash. Henry Caldwell's empire had not only fallen, it had been devoured, leaving him a hollow figure of defeat beneath the cruel spotlight. Henry Caldwell walked through the silent lobby, marble floors echoing under his steps, each sound a reminder of what was lost. His voice was faint. "This empire was my blood." Claire Whitmore followed, her tone breaking. "You gave everything, and it devoured you." Jonathan Pierce muttered bitterly, "They celebrate while you drown in ruin." The once grand building felt hollow, walls stripped of pride, halls heavy with memory. Henry Caldwell touched the company seal, etched in stone, whispering, "This was never just business. It was my life." His hand trembled as the weight of finality pressed down. Reporters swarmed outside the gates, flashbulbs lighting the night like firestorms. A journalist shouted, "Henry Caldwell, will you resign in disgrace?" Henry Caldwell's jaw tightened, his silence louder than fury. Claire Whitmore whispered, "Do not give them more blood." Jonathan Pierce muttered, "They will not stop until you are ashes." The mob surged, voices blending into a storm of condemnation. Headlines glowed on screens around them, each word chiseling his downfall into stone. Henry Caldwell raised his head once, his eyes hollow, then stepped into the waiting car, vanishing into the night's roar. In a dim bar far from the skyscrapers, Richard Stanton sat across from Henry Caldwell. His words low and cutting. Richard Stanton said, "I warned you." "Ambition always eats its own," Henry Caldwell whispered. "I thought I could hold it together." Richard Stanton's eyes narrowed. "The empire was never yours. It was theirs, and they discarded you." The silence stretched heavy, broken only by the clink of glasses. Henry Caldwell looked into the amber liquid, seeing not whiskey but the ashes of what once was. Claire Whitmore stood in the doorway, watching in quiet grief. Olivia Reed walked into the boardroom, now buzzing with new energy. Executives turned their eyes toward her as she placed a folder on the table. Olivia Reed said, "The future begins here, and I will lead it." Claire Whitmore whispered from the shadows, "The underdog has become the queen." Jonathan Pierce muttered, "Power does not vanish. It shifts." Henry Caldwell's name was already fading, erased by the rise of another. The storm had consumed one titan only to crown another in silence. Alone at dawn, Henry Caldwell stood on the rooftop, the skyline bathed in crimson light. His voice was faint. "They took my empire, but they cannot take my shadow." Claire Whitmore approached, her words trembling. "What remains of you, Henry?" Jonathan Pierce's voice echoed from behind, "Only a ghost chained to ambition." The city stretched endless, cold, and indifferent. Henry Caldwell closed his eyes, the wind howling like an elegy. The downfall was complete, his name etched not in triumph, but in ruin. Silence consumed him as the sun rose, a haunting end to a relentless storm.